Well, hey, everybody, it is so good to be together. And today we're talking about some of the emerging trends in churches. And when I was on church staff, I would say to people, if you don't like what we've changed, just give us 6 months because the emerging trends will allow us to change it again. So here's my question for you. What are some of the high level trends that you're seeing in churches today?
Yeah, I'll start. My perspective is a little bit different because I'm coming from a leadership role in ministry while you all are consulting. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on this. But coming out of the last couple of years, we've really had to balance this hybrid online in-person church, right? And what we really have noticed is that there have been great opportunities from really serving with excellence on our online campus, which is something that we've never done before. And there's this experience that's happening online that's really helping people come into church. And that's been a great way for us to evangelize. It's almost digital evangelism, right? And another way that we've seen that digitally is we have a prayer wall that's not only in person, but it's online. We have small groups that meet through Zoom, and we have YouVersion Bible studies using an app. So these are all things that we would have never focused on before that have been great coming out of the last couple of years.
And my guess is you probably like 3 or 4 years ago wouldn't have even
Oh my gosh,
envisioned
no.
what you just said.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, it's been really cool, really cool.
And I would say from a historical point of view, you're talking about current leading in a church. I would say historically, there seems like there's been a big change from the attractional to the transformational. You know, there was a time where churches wanted to reduce the shock factor when somebody from the community came in. So music and other things were meant to somewhat emulate culture. Today, it seems as if the church has said, you know what, culture is changing too fast. There's too many variables. We're going to go towards discipleship. We're going to move from the programmatic into more of the personal, which I think has driven communities, that whole emphasis on life change rather than head knowledge, or let's see how many we can get. So church growth maybe is taking a backseat to church health, which I think is probably healthy.
Yeah, and building on that, it's a struggle for churches because in some ways you have to redefine your baseline because the numbers may not be what they were pre-pandemic. And so you have to give the freedom to say, God's doing something new today. Let's stop living in the shadow of the past. Because a lot of the churches we work with are really struggling with that. But pre-pandemic, but just 5 years ago, we were this. Yes, but God's doing something new today. And those numbers may be different. And some of the things you did before may not work. So you have to adjust and kind of say, this is what we're doing. This is what God's doing today. Accept the lower numbers for some churches. Other churches are exceeding. Others are still, this national statistics are still saying 30% of church goers haven't returned from the pandemic. And so if you're still waiting for them to return or thinking that's when you've arrived, you're missing what God's doing in the center right now, today, with the people who are showing up.
So they're not coming back in 2 months in mass.
Exactly.
Okay.
You can't just keep holding on.
I think statistically, it's interesting. They estimate in the U.S. there are several 100,000 churches. And maybe 5, 7, 8 years ago, there were 2,000, 2,500 mega churches defined as average attendance of 2,000 or more. Post-pandemic, that number has dropped in half. Yeah. They estimate between 9 to 1,100 mega churches. And I think there is something about people recognizing maybe I was a little bit too connected to the attractional. I don't mean this in a bad way, the smoke and mirrors a little bit, right? And now they've been through a very hard season. There is more uncertainty. There's a lack of trust in our culture. And I think people want more than just, I came, I drank my coffee, my kids were safe, I went home. They're really looking for kingdom impact in their heart.
Yeah. And don't you think some of that is because many places had to actually close down during the pandemic. Their local governments insisted on it. And I think it took away some of the stigma of not physically going to a church. I know many people found like, wow, I can grow spiritually without having to get up, get dressed, and go have all of the trappings of an institutional church experience. Not that that's bad, but I just think some people thought, I'm doing just fine having my small group or my dinner group or listening to the sermon and a music selection of my choice virtually. And, those of us so involved in church would rather not see that trend, but I think it's here and it's probably here to stay. But that doesn't mean some people aren't finding not only the gospel, but a sense of community. I think people were lonely, isolated, and I think they're finding a new dimension in church life where they're connecting with others.
Yeah. And it's also says a lot about church is not one size fits all, and it's not always the same for everyone. And so there is this deeper connection and fellowship that's happening outside of the walls of the church, but there's also this opportunity to not be distracted, right? And to really be focused in on the word, focused in on the worship, focused in on your own spiritual growth, that sometimes, honestly, church can be distracting. We always say that sometimes church would be a lot easier if there weren't people, but that is the whole purpose of what we're doing, right?
It eliminates parking problems.
Yeah,
I know that.
exactly, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Pew just came out with research that said it's 66% of Christians that they surveyed said it is okay to worship at home alone. And it's just as the highest number ever because for 2-3 years, depending on the pandemic, we told you, stay home. It's okay. And so people have believed us and have stayed home. And so what brings them back out again? So it's not to invalidate the online experience. It is powerful. It is important, but I don't think it's everything, although it's the best it can be. How do we get them back? How do you start pulling them back in? I think what we said, it's the community and it's the teaching of truth. That's what I'm really seeing is people are wanting, the churches we're working with that tend to really be kind of more on an upswing, tend to have programs for people asking questions, more kind of apologetics, more clear teaching, topical, but with big chunks of scripture or exegetical, so that they're really going deep into scriptures. It seems like there's a hunger for truth in an age where truth seems to have changed, and there is no more truth in culture anymore.
And I think, Dave, that points to, I think what we're all seeing is there are some attitudinal differences among leaders. I think in some ways, some leaders have been humbled. They're willing to seek help. Wise people do seek counsel, right? We kind of built a whole consulting firm around that idea that you can't always hire people to come in and be a part of your staff. Sometimes you gotta import that, and that's one of the benefits I think we have of seeing so many different things. But many leaders prior to 4 or 5 years ago, they thought they were to deliver the vision like Moses coming down the mountain. Where I see a lot of leaders asking for voice and input from the very people they're trying to lead, whether that's in a nonprofit, faith-based, or a church. They're actually saying, I want to hear from the stakeholders. What's God doing in their lives? Which I think that's a pretty positive trend. How about you guys? What are you seeing in leaders that's a little different?
Well, I know if I were to go back and be on staff at a church like you are, the first thing I would say is I want outside help. I want somebody that isn't in the system, that they see the clothes in the corner, they see some of the spots, because when you're there long enough, you just miss those things. Mm-hmm. I would be very insistent about wanting to have somebody providing that outside influence, right? That calibration a little bit to bounce ideas off of, and to almost be a truth teller at times, to agree that we all carry some blind spots and allow somebody to be able to speak into that. And I think we're starting to see that. I've been really impressed. The leaders who are continuing in church, if there's a character trait that I've been impressed with, it's the one of humility. And Dave, you and I have worked on this a lot, where I kind of come in with a group and go, the first thing I'm evaluating is the humility of that particular group, the humbleness of that group. And what I'm seeing is if you're not, you probably don't have a long runway at that church anymore. It just is, I get that sense that there's a humble movement amongst leaders that I hadn't seen maybe in the past.
Yeah, and I'm excited for that because, if the devil's greatest sin was pride, the solution to pride is humility. And I think it's the humility that leaders show, either asking for help, referring to their team, learning to be more a little bit participatory in leadership. I think that goes a long way in opening it up for the Spirit to move and for God to move in that. And that's what I talk to some of our clients. It's, yes, we bring expertise. Yes, we bring some outside perspective. I think what allows God to do what he's done in some of the churches we've worked with is the humility of the leaders to say, yes, come along. And we're open to the ideas. We're open to it. I think that makes all the difference.
And there's a certain level of surrender that comes with that too. And, one thing that we're learning is, it's okay to lower your expectations to create new ones, right? And there's really something valuable in that, right? Because we lived our last few years with a growth strategy and was forced into then coming up with a new strategy. And so that really changed us to start going through, okay, what's our engagement strategy? Yeah. What's our connection strategy? And so now our new metric is no longer attendance, like you were saying earlier, it's no longer some of those metrics in financial giving, because all of those things honestly are down for us. It's the engagement, it's the volunteer involvement, it's the number of groups, it's sometimes even the number of views and how people are even talking to each other online. So we actually created new metrics for ourselves, but we're not holding that to the highest standard, of measurement for our organization. So it really is that surrender that's really, really helped.
And I wonder if some of that hasn't been, what we view as an attack sometimes on the evangelical community because of celebrity pastors and ministry leaders have done some incredibly stupid things. And so I think there's an effort to distance ourselves from that high power, I'm in charge kind of leader, because society has exposed some of that. And so I think maybe that contributes to the humility of some leaders. I don't have anything to prove. I don't have to meet the standard somebody else is setting out there for me. Just be a humble servant of God. Let God use you. And again, I think that's very positive.
Yeah, and I would add, and lean into what is the core of the church? Community. We were talking about Gen Z a little bit earlier. They are open to the gospel. That is what the new studies are showing. They're very open to the gospel, but they're open to authenticity. They want to be engaged. And I think people don't just want to attend church anymore. They want that engagement. Put me to work. I want to be a part of the kingdom. I want to make a difference in my church. And we've heard that many times. When churches really understand that it's not about getting volunteers like someone working at YMCA, it's about unleashing people to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And when they do that, they're going to connect with God in a deeper way. All of a sudden, you're hearing stories of like, I've always wanted to use my outside gifts that I get paid for in my church. And churches sometimes forget to ask. And so I think just reimagining that we have an opportunity to invite people into something beautiful. The church, go back to its strengths. It is community and is the gospel. There's forgiveness of sins. There's power in the Holy Spirit. And there's people that can love you through every ups and downs and through all stages of life. And if we get back into embracing that, and we see churches doing it, and the churches that are doing it, you're seeing are catching momentum.
Well, I love the fact that you guys stay up on Gen Z, and it gives us a lot of hope. And as we're wrapping up, I would remind us that 10,000 people a day in the United States are turning 65. And so, there may be a rebirth of how do we integrate these generations, and somehow that seems pretty biblical.
Well, Dave, when I was a youth pastor, so a few years ago, the best event we did an event where we provided a meal for all the senior saints in our church, and then after the meal was done, that our students cooked and gave, we would actually sit with those senior saints and play games for an hour. So the first part might be like, the young person would tell the senior saint what their journey was like and vice versa. And if you went back and asked some of our students, that was one of their favorite nights. I do think there is something powerful about that intergenerational feel. But I grew up maybe with a more of a perspective, and I think it was more my fault, but I thought asking for help was a sign of weakness, not a sign of strength. I think some of that was taught, and then we had these huge growth models as the megachurch kind of started to onboard, and now like asking for help is really a sign of strength. And one of the areas that I'm just very concerned about in the church is right now we're seeing the evangelistic growth of the church at about 0.08%. So churches are growing at less than 1% salvation growth. Most churches that are growing, it's like just shuffling the deck, so to speak. I'm moving from here to here, here to here. And I wonder what it's going to take for, the church to really get back to that model of seeking and saving the lost. You seek them on their terms, and then you work to really share the gospel in a way that they can hear.
and equipping people who feel lost in culture. Your idea is great, and I love that people call the center, say, "What are you guys hearing? Put your ear to the ground. Tell us what you're seeing going on." But I think one of the key characteristics for us is there's great hope for the church in the days to come, and privileged to work with all of you, and we sure love our clients. And so thanks for watching, and I hope you'll look to the center for some resource and help.